The engine of Kenny Tanaka's battered Jeep sputtered as he navigated the rough, overgrown road leading towards the eastern flanks of Mauna Loa. The air grew cooler, heavier. At 36, Kenny carried the lean, sun-chiseled look of a man who had traded the confines of a Navy radio shack for the wide, unpredictable canvas of geology. After serving his time in the Pacific, mostly shuttling encrypted messages between fleet commanders, he was drawn back to the islands, seeking an anchor in the immovable rock of his homeland. His current obsession, a forgotten lava tube system rumored to hold mineral deposits near an old restricted WW2-era firebreak. He parked the Jeep, the silence immediately swallowing the sound of the engine. The path was barely visible, choked by ferns and creeping vines. Kenny, shouldering a geological hammer and a heavy-duty flashlight, wiped the sweat from his brow. This part of the island was raw, sacred, and unforgiving. He was alone. The entrance to the lava tube was hidden beneath a tangle of thick ulu trees, a vertical chimney barely wide enough to squeeze through. He lowered himself to the cool subterranean air. The beam of his flashlight cut through the absolute darkness, revealing walls of glassy. He was deep, following a natural fault line, when the geology suddenly changed. The perfect, smooth lava tube gave way to crudely blasted rock and a concrete bulkhead. Impossible. He had stumbled onto something man-made and clearly military, deep within the mountain. The steel door was a thick, rusted monster, but the heavy-duty combination lock, astonishingly, was gone, replaced by a simple, weathered rope tie. Kenny paused, the geologist's curiosity giving way to a veteran's instinct. He pushed the door inward, and the smell that hit him was not musty air, but a sharp, clean scent of disinfectant and stale ration. The beam landed on a sight that froze his blood. A figure in a faded, immaculate U.S. Army uniform, sitting at a salvage desk in a small communication. The man's back was his helmet on the desk, his hands resting on a vintage BC 610 radio receiver. But it was the face of Kenny. Emaciated but clean-shaven, the eyes wide, haunted, and deeply set in a face that hadn't seen the sun in years. "State your business," the soldier said, his voice a dry rasp, his tone commanding. "You are in a restricted zone. This facility is under wartime security orders." Kenny's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The man, a sergeant, judging by the stripes, spoke of wartime security in 1959. "Sergeant," Kenny managed, trying to keep the tremor from. "My name is Kenji Tanaka. I'm a civilian. I don't know what this place is. The war has been over for 14 years. 14 years. The sergeant's face remained impassive, then fractured, a flicker of doubt, quickly replaced by a profound, terrifying paranoia. "Lies," the sergeant, rising slowly, his hand moving to a holstered Colt M1911, polished and functional. "Japanese intelligence operatives are known for their cunning. The radio silence is a tactic. They are testing me. I was ordered to guard this post. My orders are to hold. I will not break." He was not merely a soldier. He was a living relic, a sentinel whose clock stopped in August 1945. Kenny felt a lump forming in his throat, a rush of overwhelming grief and shock. He saw not a threat, but a man completely and utterly broken by duty and isolation. This was the moment the news reports would later describe, the breakdown, the sheer weight of witnessing such devastating isolation. "Sergeant, please, my father fought for this country. Look at my shirt. Look at my gear. No uniform, no threat. Just a civilian. Your name, sir." "What is your name?" The sergeant hesitates, darting to. "Technical Sergeant Elias Vance. Radio operator. Code designation Argus." "Sergeant Vance," Kenny said, his voice dropping near whisper. "I have to know. What are you guarding? What was the mission?" The mystery was now a physical presence in the room, colder than the cave air. Vance's haunted gaze fixed on a sealed, heavily chained steel safe in the corner. The Argus Protocol. Coded military intelligence, the highest priority. Orders were explicit. If radio silence was prolonged for more than 90 days, I was to hold position, maintain the signal log, and protect the safe at all costs until relieved by a designated officer. The Argus Protocol. Kenny had never heard of it. But a quick glance at the logbook on Vance's desk showed meticulous entries, the final date being August 6, 1945, the day the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. Vance had logged the start of the prolonged silence, and then nothing but the silent passage of years. The true mystery wasn't that Vance was still guarding, but why his mission was so thoroughly erased, so effectively abandoned. What was in that safe, and who issued the Argus protocol? Kenny knew he couldn't leave Vance. The man would shoot any official rescue team convinced they were infiltrators, but to stay was to enter the sergeant's 1945 reality, a world of shadows, secrets, and a war that was still very much alive in the subterranean bunk. Vance's hand remained on his breathing was shallow, his eyes assessing. The years of isolation had honed him into a human weapon. Civilian, Vance is firming, you have compromised security. I need to know how you found this. Tell me the truth. Is Saipan secure? The suspense was immediate and suffocating. Kenny had a man on the brink and a secret vault that held a truth powerful enough to keep a soldier underground for 14 years. To survive, Kenny had to become part of the Argus protocol. He had to convince Vance of the post-war world or die trying to solve the mystery of his lost mission. Are you intrigued by Sergeant Vance's fate and the secret of the Argus protocol? Don't miss out on the next chapter, where Kenny tries to prove the war is over and begins to unravel the truth about the missing intelligence. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a moment of the fading echo. The standoff was broken not by force, but by the sergeant's rigid adherence to protocol. Vance allowed Kenny to live, but under severe restriction. He demanded Kenny recount the entire history of the war, meticulously checking Kenny's narrative against the cryptic, truncated messages in his logbook. Show me the last full transmission, Sergeant, Kenny insisted, pointing to the meticulously ordered ledger. Vance reluctantly. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the entries were precise. The last decipherable message, dated July 28, 1945, read, Targeted asset, Operative K, en route ELO. Intel transfer critical to Saipan counteroffensive success. Argus post designated as Final Relay. KETA 72 hours. Standby for Argus protocol activation. Priority Delta 6. Kenny felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. An operative, K, carrying critical intelligence, Saipan, already secured, scheduled to arrive 72 hours later. The Argus protocol was the final relay point. Then, nothing. Total radio silence, which Vance interpreted as the enemy cutting all lines, mandating his indefinite. K never arrived, his voice cracking the decade frustration. He was intercepted. That is why the war continues. They must not get the intelligence. Sergeant, if the war were still on, the Japanese would have long since searched every inch of this island, especially Pearl Harbor, Kenny argued, pointing to the... And if K was carrying critical intel in July 45, whatever it was, it's irrelevant now. The entire intelligence landscape changed with the bomb. The word bomb hit Vance like a physical blow. His eyes, already wide, dilated further. What bomb? What are you talking about? There are no weapons that can stop an invasion force of millions. Kenny knew he had to introduce the modern world gradually. He spent the next 3 hours leaning on the desk, sketching maps, describing the 2 atomic blasts, the surrender, occupation of Japan, and the creation of the United Nations. He spoke of television, jets, and Hawaii becoming the 50th state, a fact that caused Vance profound Vance listened, his body rigid, his Colt still on the desk. He didn't believe, not fully, but the logic was beginning to erode the brittle walls of his isolation. He kept returning to one point. If the war is over, where is Operative K? If he arrived, why did I never receive the final stand-down code contained in the intelligence transfer? Perhaps K never arrived at all. Perhaps he was intercepted before he reached Hilo, and no one knew he was supposed to activate the Argus post for the final relay. Vance slammed his hand on the desk, sending a small tremor through the bunker. No! K was ordered here. He was my relief, my proof. The safe contains the full Argus mission details. It needs K's final command code to open. I have the sequence for the combination, but I need the code word from K to confirm the all clear. Without that, the safe and the post remain classified and active. Kenny looked at the steel safe, now the epicenter of the mystery. The combination was known, but the final critical command code was... It was a fail-safe, a final twist of... He realized that to free Vance, he had to find the truth about Operative K. "Sergeant, to find K, we need outside information. We need records, names, files. If K went missing right here in Hilo, there must be a paper trail, even a deeply buried one. We have to leave the bunker." Vance slowly shook his head, looking around the small room that had been his world for 14 years. "Leave? The enemy will find the post. They will take the Argus document." "Haifi Isarafalia." "No, Sergeant," Kenny insisted, leaning in. "The enemy isn't Japan anymore. It's the U.S. military machine that forgot you. They've moved on, closed the files, and buried the evidence of a failed intelligence mission and a lost soldier. If we want to solve this, we have to slip into their world, use their technology, and find the forgotten records before they find you." Vance's gaze was one of calculated desperation. The modern world, but the lure of completing his mission, the core of his identity, was stronger. He picked up his helmet and secured it. "I need a disguise, I need ration, and I need to know the route of evasion. If we are caught, we use lethal force." "Is that understood, civilian?" Kenny nodded, the gravity of the situation crashing down. He was now guiding a highly trained, traumatized soldier of fortune into the peaceful streets of 1959 Hawaii. The real adventure and the real danger was about to begin. The journey out of the Mauna Loa wilderness was fraught with silence and peril. Kenny navigated the steep, uneven terrain, carrying Vance's heavy field gear. Vance, stripped of his uniform and wearing borrowed, ill-fitting civilian clothes, a faded Hawaiian shirt, trousers, walked with a predatory, military precision, his eyes scanning every shadow, every passing. The world was too bright, too loud, too unguarded for him. The simple act of a family laughing on a porch made him jump. "No security perimeter," Vance muttered, sweat beading on his forehead, his trauma amplifying the noise. "No blackout. They are complacent. The enemy is near." "The enemy is peace, Sergeant," Kenny countered softly, "and bureaucracy. That's what buried you." Their immediate goal was the old records annex at the decommissioned naval base in Hilo, where Kenny knew archaic, undigitized WW2 documents were still stored. But first, they needed information on K. Kenny brought Vance to his small wooden house in a quiet, older Hilo neighborhood. The sergeant examined the small, mid-century kitchen, the refrigerator humming, the television blinking, with utter disbelief. He was fascinated by the sheer volume of civilian goods and the lack of austerity. "This is decadence," Vance judged, his eyes on a newspaper headline about a new space race. "They are wasting resources while the conflict is merely dormant." Kenny ignored the commentary, focusing on the newspaper archive. He had to search for anything relating to a missing intelligence operative or a strange incident in the Hilo area around July-August 1945. After hours of tense, meticulous work, illuminated by a single desk lamp, Kenny found it. A tiny, faded article from an obscure local paper dated August 10, 1945. "Sailor's accident in Hilo docks. Navy seaman first class. Unidentifiable. Recovered near Pier 7. Sustained fatal head trauma from a fall. No family identified. Burial pending." "A sailor?" Kenny pointing to the photo. A blurry image of a body covered by a sheet. Why was an intelligence operative codenamed K listed as an anonymous Navy seaman? Vance leaned in, his gaze razor-sharp. The Navy was covering for K, or K was using deep cover. Pier 7, that's near the old quartermaster's office. The intelligence transfer must have been scheduled there, not the Argus post. The plot thickened. Why the change of plans? And if K died from an accidental fall, why was his death so conveniently unremarkable? "We need the official accident report," Kenny determined. If K was carrying the Argus final code, it must have been with him, or in the materials he was carrying. That report is in the records. The infiltration was planned for the dead of night. The annex was a sprawling, mothballed building guarded by a single, aging civilian security guard. Kenny and Vance moved under the cover of a rare, intense tropical downpour. The rain battered the corrugated iron roofs, providing perfect cover for their movements. Inside, the annex was a cavern of forgotten history. Dusty shelves holding millions of files, smelling of stale paper and mold. They found the 1945 records section. Kenny used his geological tools to quickly defeat a simple lock. They searched the Q-Master's accident reports for August 45. After 30 minutes of stressful searching, Vance stopped. He held a manila folder, his hands trembling. The file number matched the article. He pulled out the report. The details were clinical. Cause of death: accidental cranial fracture. But tucked inside, a small, heavily redacted memo caught Kenny's eye. It was addressed from a high-ranking officer to a provost marshal. The package was lost at sea during the incident. Recovered items include only a damaged leather satchel and a wet notebook. No documentation of the Alpha key was found. Close file immediately under accidental death, Seaman First Class. Maintain total silence. The failure of Argus must not become public. Alpha key, Vance breathed, his eyes wide with terrifying clarity. That's it. That's the code word to open the safe. The Argus Protocol final command. It was in the satchel. They lost it. They covered it up to hide the intelligence failure, and they let me rot here, believing the war was still on. The psychological weight of the betrayal was immediate. Vance slumped against the shelves, the reality of his abandonment finally breaking through his paranoia. His sacrifice was not a noble duty, but a forgotten, expendable casualty of a high-level cover-up. Just as the revelation hit them, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the main corridor. The security guard was making his rounds, his flashlight beam slicing through the dust-filled air. They were trapped, and Vance had just confirmed the existence of a high-level conspiracy. The danger was no longer war, exposure. "Move!" Kenny hissed, pulling Vance deeper between the towering stacks of forgotten. The sound of the guard's footsteps grew louder, closer. Vance, reeling from the realization of his abandonment, moved on pure instinct, a trained machine. They managed to slip into a ventilation shaft and make their way back outside, merging with the shadows of the old dockyard. The rain had stopped, and the air was still and humid. The adrenaline, however, was quickly fading, replaced by the crushing weight of reality for Vance. Back at Kenny's house, Vance was quiet, his face pale beneath the film of dust and grime. He sat staring at the redacted memo. The Alpha key was lost at sea, the words tasting like ash. The entire Argus mission, the intelligence critical to winning the war, the safe, the years of holding the line, all for a key they dropped in the ocean and then lied about. Not necessarily lost, Kenny corrected, picking up the memo says, recovered items include a damaged leather satchel and a wet notebook. The Alpha key wasn't found with the other document, but maybe it was in the notebook. Kay was a trained operative. He wouldn't write the key out plainly. It would be a cipher. The focus shifted. They had the cipher's container, the wet notebook recovered from the accident. They had to find the notebook. A new surge of determination hardened Vance's gaze. His mission, now, was not to guard a secret war, but to expose a real silent cover-up and reclaim his lost honor. "The provost marshal who received this memo," Vance declared, pointing to the name on the old document, "is the key. He would have handled the recovered possessions, or nowhere." Kenny searched the newspaper archives again, this time for the provost marshal, a Colonel Arthur Hayes. Hayes had retired a few years after the war, moving to a secluded, wealthy neighborhood on the cliffs overlooking the sea near Kaluakona on the western side of the Big Island. The plan was daring: cross the entire island to confront Hayes, a retired high-ranking officer who had something to hide. It was a 90-mile drive, volcanic landscape and dense forest, a journey Vance viewed as crossing hostile territory. The drive was psychologically brutal for the paved roads, the sheer volume of civilian traffic, the brightly lit roadside diners, the sensory. He gripped the door handle, constantly looking over his shoulder, convinced they were being followed by enemy agents or federal investigators looking to silence him. "You need to trust me, Sergeant," Kenny said, maneuvering the Jeep skillfully. "We are just two men in a beat-up Jeep. We look like tourists. Nobody cares. Complacency is a weakness," Vance clipped back, but he didn't argue further. He was learning to trust Kenny's knowledge of this frightening new world. They located Hayes's large, isolated house just as the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long, purple shadows. Kenny approached the front door, while Vance secured the perimeter, taking cover among the hibiscus bushes, his combat instincts fully engaged. Colonel Hayes, now a frail, silver-haired man in a smoking jacket, answered the door. He looked confused, then annoyed, at the sight of the civilian. "Yes, I'm busy. Who are you?" Hayes asked, his voice retaining a crisp, authoritative edge. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Kenny Tanaka. I'm an investigator. We are here about the death of a seaman first class near Pier 7, August 1945, and the Argus Protocol," Kenny said, keeping his tone even and formal. Hayes's composure shattered. His face went white. He tried to slam the door, but Kenny blocked it with his foot. "You have no business with that. It was classified and closed," Hayes stammered, his eyes darting toward his darkened living room. "Get off my property." Suddenly, Vance was there, emerging from the shadows, his presence radiating menace. He was holding the Colt M1911, the weapon of a war that Hayes thought he had long since buried. "You betrayed me, Colonel," Vance said, his voice a low, terrifying. "You filed the false report. You covered up the Argus intelligence 14 years. You left me to hold the line for 14 years. Hayes stared at the gun he thought was. The color drained from his face. And, "Vance, you're alive." "Lost." "The notebook, Colonel," Kenny demanded, stepping forward as Hayes stumbled. "The wet notebook from Operative K. Where is the Alpha key?" Hayes collapsed into a nearby armchair, his voice trembling. "It's in the safe. My home office. I kept it, damn it. I couldn't destroy it. It was K's final message." Vance moved past Hayes, driven by a renewed, terrifying sense of purpose. The safe was right there. The mystery of the Alpha key was within reach. Before we find out the final truth in the final chapter, remember to smash that like button if you're hooked on this story. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and tell us in the comments what you think the Alpha key will reveal about Operative K. The atmosphere in Hayes' office was charged with a mixture of terror and desperate finality. Vance, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man trained for this moment, found the small camouflaged safe behind a bookshelf. Hayes, still pale, watched in silent dread. "The combination," Vance ordered, his pistol pointed squarely at Hayes. Hayes, without protest, recited the numbers. Vance quickly spun the dial. The tumblers clicked into place, but the safe remained locked. It required the final decisive code, the Alpha key. "The notebook, Hayes, where is it?" Vance's voice was strained. The years of torment concentrated into this one moment. Hayes pointed to a heavy iron-bound chest in the corner. "It's in there. I kept it preserved. I was waiting for someone to ask." Kenny cautiously opened the chest. Inside, protected by layers of heavy cloth and desiccant, was a small, mildewed leather satchel and a sodden, brittle field notebook, the very items recovered from the drowned Operative K. Vance snatched the notebook and flipped through the water-damaged pages. Most of the entries were cryptic intelligence notes about troop movements and supply lines, irrelevant, fading war data. Then, on the final page, he found it. A simple sketch of the Mauna Loa bunker entrance, and beneath it, a sequence of 5 words written in a barely legible cipher. Vance looked at Kenny. "It's a substitution cipher. Visionaire, K and I shared a childhood cipher wheel. A simple transposition." They worked quickly, their heads bent over the desk, their shared knowledge of military coding bridging the 14-year gap. The cipher began to yield the final code word, Argonaut. "Argonaut," Vance breathed, his eyes shining with a strange mix of triumph and devastation. He walked back to his hand, trembling slightly. Vance entered the word into a recessed alphabetical keypad beneath the combination lock. With a final clunk, the heavy door of the safe swung open. Inside were not explosive, but a single, pristine folder. Vance pulled it out, his fingers brushing the. It was the Argus Protocol. The document was brief. It detailed the true mission. Argus was not a communications post for Saipan. It was a secure relay for high-level peace talk. Operative K was not carrying war intelligence, but the final secret terms of surrender from a small, deeply embedded faction of Japanese officials attempting to bypass the hardliners. The critical intelligence was simply the timing and location of their covert communication with U.S. commanders. The memo finished with a clear order. If the Argus post was activated, it meant K had successfully transferred the terms. Vance's duty was to open the safe, verify the terms, and transmit a single, encrypted, all-clear signal, confirming that the peace process was underway. But K died. The Alpha key Argonaut was lost. Hayes, fearing the political fallout and the exposure of a classified, unauthorized back-channel peace effort, filed the false report to cover up the lost surrender terms and the failure of the Argus Protocol. He had let the war run its full catastrophic course, simply to protect his career and the reputation of his superiors. He had also left Vance to guard a secret that could have ended the war sooner. Vance looked at Hayes, the anger replaced by a chilling, profound pity. "You coward! You sacrificed the lives of thousands for a promotion." Hayes, weeping, nodded. "I was ordered to ensure the official narrative held. The chain of command, it was too much." The mystery was solved. The Argonaut code word was the key not to a continuing war, but to a tragically lost opportunity for peace. Kenny, seeing the absolute devastation in Vance's eyes, stepped forward, placing a hand on the sergeant's shoulder. "Vance, it's over. Your duty is complete. You held the line. You uncovered the truth. You are a hero, not because you guarded a post, but because you stayed true to your orders, and now you can finally lay them to rest." The sound of police sirens, faint but unmistakable, began to drift up the cliffside. Hayes, in his panic, had pressed a silent alarm. The real world was catching up. "We have to go," Kenny urged. "They will try to silence this. We need proof." Vance, however, was already moving. He walked to Hayes's safe, took the Argus Protocol document, and placed the pistol back into its holster. "The mission is not complete, civilian," Vance said, a new clarity in his voice. "The truth has been guarded for too long. I will not be silenced. I will deliver this final dispatch, not to a radio operator, but to the American." Kenny watched as Vance, the broken sentinel of a lost war, finally stepped out of the shadow of his past and into the light of the present, ready to face the world he had never known. The soldier's long, terrifying watch was finally over, but the fight for his honor and the truth was beginning. The final echo of the war would be heard in 1959.